Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Canato, Program and Policy Associate here at IEDC. We'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar event, Preparing for the Next Wave of Investment, Reshoring and FDI. This event is part of IEDC's series on different topics related to the economic development and response to COVID-19, the coronavirus. Before we get started, I would like to share a few housekeeping notes. Please note that all attendees will be muted during the webinar. You will have an opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane in your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time, and we will address them during the Q&A session. Within 48 hours of today's webinar, presentation slides will be available to all attendees. I would now like to introduce Maureen Donahue-Kraus. Maureen Donahue-Kraus serves as the President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Partnership, overseeing business development activities for an 11-county region in Southeast Michigan. To this role, she brings 35 years of economic development experience, including working in regional development. Prior to this position, she was the CEO of Donahue-Kraus, working with communities on activating their strategic plans in the areas of international and domestic business development, community development, and talent attraction. Maureen, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Erica, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, an installment in the International Economic Development Council series on how economic developers and their communities are addressing the COVID-19 crisis. For the foreseeable future, IEDC will be hosting these webinars with the intent to share resources, tools, best practices, and the latest updates. Today, we are honored to welcome a group of experts to learn from. Bruce Takafman, the President of Research FDI, Susan Davenport, Economic Development Senior Vice President and Chief Economic Development Officer at the Greater Houston Partnership, and Michelle Comerford, Project Director, Industrial and Supply Chain Practice Leader at Biggins, Lacey, Shapiro and Company. We are excited to have all of you join us for this important webinar. I'd like to remind our participants again that you can type your questions into the question tab on your GoToWebinars dashboard, and representatives from IEDC will be standing by to answer them. When our presenters come to the end of the webinar, we will take questions from the audience. I'll be reading the bios of our speakers in the order of who is presenting. So first, let me introduce Bruce Takafman. Bruce is the founder and president of Research Consultants International and leads a seasoned and enthused team that provides economic development consulting for some of the world's most prominent EDOs. Bruce understands international markets, having worked with clients based across the United States, Canada, Europe, South America, and Asia. Bruce's work amongst different continents enables him to maximize the potential for his clients to seize global opportunities. Bruce's experience has led him to work extensively with a wide array of clients touching upon various industries, such as the biotech and agriculture, aerospace and aviation, IT, financial services, medical, advanced manufacturing, and renewable energy sectors, among others. His work to date and large network has led to millions in new investment opportunities for regions around the world. Furthermore, Bruce possesses a strong knowledge of trade shows, having helped prepare clients to attend some of the world's most prestigious shows. Bruce earned his Bachelor of Commerce from the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University in Montreal, Quebec. He earned his major in marketing, and Bruce is a proud member of the International Economic Development Council. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Maureen. Great to be here, and hello to all around the world. Appreciate you guys participating in this webinar. So today we're gonna go ahead and talk about reshoring trends and predictions post COVID-19. Having some technical difficulties here. Here we go. All right, so Research FDI. So Maureen initially introduced us as Research Consultants International. We just rebranded ourselves as Research FDI. So we are a global market research and business intelligence firm based primarily in Montreal. We have about 40 staff here and 75 around the world. So we help clients schedule qualified meetings with companies basically around the world in their target sectors. We speak numerous languages, including English, Italian, Serbian, Dutch, Japanese, French, German. Again, we're headquartered in Montreal, but we have satellite offices and partner locations across North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. So here you look at the Foreign Direct Investment Confidence Index. So you'll notice between 2018 and 2019, inflows in North America relatively remain the same, with it being 297 billion in 2018 and 298 billion in 2019, with Canada and the US possessing the first and second ranking in terms of investor confidence. Fast forward to 2020, we find ourselves with escalating tensions with China, potential for increased protectionism, and obviously the economic and geopolitical fallout of COVID-19 will weigh heavily in investor confidence in 2020 and 2021. In terms of technology investment, we also could face the US could face possible decrease in investment from the Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, FIRMA, that was implemented in 2018. So this was a survey that was conducted by Carney in 2020. So they first started doing the survey in January 2020, and you could imagine investor confidence was bullish even as the COVID-19 pandemic was sweeping through Asia. So the survey initially took part between January 27th and March 3rd. So the first 2 weeks of March, you'll notice a pretty high investor confidence. Then you'll notice the second 2 weeks of March and the last 2 weeks how you can imagine the plummeting of investor and foreign direct investment confidence based on the effects of COVID-19 and the potential effects of it in terms of FDI confidence. So each year, Carney releases a reshoring index. Basically, the reshoring index measures the total manufacturing goods imported versus the goods manufactured in the United States. So they track offshoring partners in lower cost countries like China, Taiwan, Malaysia, India, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia versus the US output. So as I've been talking with colleagues on this panel, we've noticed that the reshoring trend actually started in 2019. We've noticed that this index dropped several $billion dollars from where it was. It's the first year it actually went down. Obviously, that could be an effect of the trade war between the U.S. and China. And we also know this survey also noticed a diversification away from China. So other of those low-cost countries actually gained 31 billion of new imports. However, China decreased by $90 billion. So the effects of the trade war was very real in 2019, and overall a drop in the complete index. We also the survey also noticed a trend in buying more from Mexico. So that's a term called nearshoring. So as the U.S. kind of got away from China in 2019, they kind of went back to their old friend of Mexico as supply chains were often built. There was the security of the NAFTA agreement, and now that's been replaced a couple weeks ago by the USMCA. So we expect the nearshoring trend to continue with the U.S. and Mexico trading among themselves. So as mentioned, the U.S. manufacturing import ratio declined for the first time in 2019. The rate actually started to be measured in 2008, and you'll notice it went down by 1 cent from 2018 to 2019. So that's going to be a major trend, and we expect that to go down again in 2020. So another survey that we found very interesting is the Thomas survey. Basically, 1,000 North American manufacturers and industrial suppliers were surveyed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 64% of them indicated they are likely to extremely likely to consider reshoring in the future. While 85% of manufacturers did not shift their manufacturing of their goods and services to COVID-19 PPE protective equipment, the manufacturers that did were medical and healthcare industries. The agriculture and automotive manufacturer were the ones that often were more likely to shift to the production of PPE. So in order to keep their manufacturing companies going, manufacturers mentioned during the COVID-19 survey that they would need to have PPE among their staff, metals, fabricated materials, and machining tools and parts as key engines to keep their manufacturing facilities going during this difficult time. So we also noticed as part of the survey that 64% of manufacturers reported their businesses were affected by shutdown orders. The industries most likely to be affected by this were the transportation industry, 77%, automotive, 75%, constructive, 70%, and agriculture industry, 69%, being most drastically affected. So in terms of the industries most likely to reshore, the agriculture, construction, food and beverage, and transportation industries were listed as most likely to expand to reshore their industries in the future. All right, here's my contact details below. Feel free to reach out anytime with any questions, and I'd like to pass it back to Maureen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. I know that we've been talking about how this is something that all communities need to consider, really to find out if it makes sense for them and which component, because FDI is a very complex component of economic development. So we appreciate your insight, Bruce. Next, I would like to introduce Susan Davenport. Susan serves as the Senior Vice President, Economic Development at the Greater Houston Partnership. The partnership is an 1,100-member business partnership encompassing the 11-county Greater Houston region. In this role, Susan leads the organization's domestic and international economic development efforts and provides assistance to companies considering expanding, relocating, or investing in the Greater Houston region. Prior to her work in Houston, Susan served as the President CEO of the Gainesville Area Chamber of Commerce, a 5-star accredited chamber with approximately 1,300 members and organizations. Prior to her role as President CEO, she served as the Chamber's Vice President for Economic Development. While there, the Chamber announced the creation of more than 1,100 new jobs and more than $400 million in new capital investment. Susan came to Gainesville in 2013 after spending 13 years with the Austin Chamber of Commerce, most recently as Senior Vice President of Global Tech Strategies. She was a key member of the Opportunity Austin strategy and developed and executed Austin's regional business retention and expansion program called Portfolio Austin. She also developed and managed the Central Texas Regional Chamber for Innovation and Commercialization, which resulted in assisting 34 countries to access $60 million in funding. Susan also developed the Greater Austin Technology Partnership and Austin Tech Live. So she's been very, very instrumental and impactful in this area through her career. Susan received a Master's of Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Nursing from the University of Texas Medical Branch. She is also a graduate of the EDI at the University of Oklahoma and is an active member of the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives and the International Economic Development Institute. So we're going to get some boots on the ground conversation here from Susan Davenport. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the kind introduction. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. as I prepared for the information that I'm going to present to you, and coordinated with the other individuals who are presenting, it was discerned the best way would probably be to give you kind of a case study of Greater Houston. And Houston, as you may know, is quite an international global city, and it's really it really permeates every fiber of what we do here. Here at the Greater Houston Partnership, we have a team of about 16 economic development professionals, and they're split into 3 teams. One is international investment and trade, one is domestic recruitment and marketing, and one are industry experts that span some of our regional target sectors. But again, the city and everything that we do and all the titles of our team here, even our industry experts, you'll see that global piece advised through that. So let me, as I'd like to start, I want to give you a quick overview of what we do. The partnership, again, is a regional economic development entity. We strive, obviously, live, work, and make the region the best place to live, work, and build a business. We do serve an 11-county Greater Houston region. We have 9 counties in our MSA, and the data points that I'll show you really focus on that 9-county number. But we have MOU relationships with 2 and soon to be 3 additional counties that surround our region that would also like our assistance and leadership with the economic development and outreach. We represent more than 1,100 businesses. Their roster of employees really collectively totals about 1/5 of Houston's workforce, about 20%. We promote economic development and trade, advocate for public policy, convene Houstonians on issue, and again, international being a great focus of what we do. So here's how the case study will run. I'll give you a very fast overview of Houston. I'm going to go through a small deck of slides. You'll have these to look at and peruse later, so I will run through these very quickly and then happy to engage questions at the end. After we look at the overview, I think it will make sense then how we're engaging on reshoring and FDI, and then some tactics for you to consider will be at the end. Again, I think this will be the best way to kind of showcase some opportunities. Hopefully from Greater Houston Story, you can take away some information that will be beneficial to your regions and communities around the nation. So quickly, Greater Houston region, we're the 4th largest U.S. city with a metro population of a little over 7 million. We're the 5th largest metro. We have about 3.1 million jobs on a very fast growth trajectory from 2010 to 2018. We increased about 23% of our job base here in Greater Houston. If you'll look here, that we were the fastest growing metro from 2010 to 2018, again with about an 18.2% growth rate around the population of this area, again 9-county MSA. And you can see from the slide how we compared around the nation. We are, and I think this slide is key, the most diverse city in America. 1 in 4 Houstonians are foreign born. There is no racial or ethnic majority. We are a very inclusive city. We speak over 145 languages, 5th largest LGBT population in the U.S., and 1/3 of the population growth was made up of immigrants from 28 to 2018. Global access, equidistance to East and West Coast in the United States, 180 nonstop domestic and international destinations from 2 international airports, direct flights to 6 continents and 37 countries with direct service from Houston. This slide, I think, tells the story. 5,000 Houston area firms, foreign government offices, and nonprofit organizations are involved in international business. We've got about 150 Houston-based companies that have about 3,000 subsidiaries in 113 foreign nations. We have 90 foreign consulates that will come into play as you hear from us on tactics, 18 sister city relationships, and 19 foreign banks that represent 10 nations. Very young talent base, 350,000 educated millennials. We have the youngest major metro median age of 34.6, about 227,000 people employed in the tech sector, and a huge engineering and corporate professional base. And I think that speaks to what you saw among the professional services, what we see every day in the headquarters throughout this region. Our top universities and colleges, we've got 430,000 students enrolled in 22-year and 24-year universities. Upskill Houston is one of the region's nationally recognized employer-led initiative that develops the talent pipeline to meet the needs of Houston's economy. You can see the educational institutions focused here, K through 12 community colleges, many of our community-based organizations and government agencies participating. And of course, everything we do is in the backdrop of the great state of Texas, #1 state for doing business, for new and expanded corporate facilities, no personal and corporate income tax. You know, we love to tell that Texas story. Houston is consistently pro-growth, #3 top cities to conduct business in, #1 metro for economic growth. Again, no zoning laws in the city of Houston. I'm sure you've heard about that, and world-class infrastructure around highways, rail, airport, seaports, and transit. Great place to live. We've gotten multiple accolades for that. And the surprising one accolade is probably the one among the country's greenest cities, with 500 miles of bikeways, 580 developed parks, and 170 open spaces. The target sectors you'll see, I think, show the span of Houston's base of industry. We are the energy capital of the world. Probably 4,800 plus energy companies and groups make up this region. Third coast for life sciences. We have one of the world's largest medical centers, 2.1 square miles, housing about 55 to 60 different healthcare institutions, employing probably 120,000 people. We're a manufacturing powerhouse. I'll talk about that in a minute. A trade and logistics hub, and America is what we call headquarters city. You can see all the Fortune 500 corporate headquarters, Fortune 1000 corporate headquarters, Fortune Global 500 corporate headquarters, etc. And then 21 Forbes Global 2000 corporate headquarters. These are our target sectors. You saw the sectors that we have well developed, and you'll notice that many of these are similar. What you will maybe not notice here is that 2.0 is a piece of what we're looking at now, is taking those developed sectors and infusing them really with digital technology across the board. So it's basically the next generation of all of that. You've heard some big announcements over the past few weeks on Energy 2.0 and all of the success that we're beginning to see based on efforts we've had underway for several years on recruiting green tech and new opportunities to the greater Houston region. And aerospace has been added as we reinvigorate everything that we've done around space. And as you know, there's a global piece to that as well. We have a 4-mile innovation corridor through the center of town, a new $100 million innovation district and building funded by Rice University. The Texas Medical Center, as I described a moment ago, the Innovation Institute for the Texas Medical Center that has over 200,000 square feet of accelerator and incubator space, and their new multi-institutional 37-acre research campus. You'll see again, NASA, I'm sure you're familiar, Johnson Space Center has been at the cutting edge and has been a great part of Houston's history and the development of our engineering base. It's among NASA's largest R&D facilities. You can see the annual budget, over 10,000 employees, and a huge boom to contracts in the Houston area. The spaceport, the future launch and landing site for suborbital reusable launch vehicles, offers lab space, tech incubator space, etc. And here again, this is a point that I want you to focus on: the manufacturing powerhouse, 6,300 manufacturing establishments, 220,000 people employed in that. We produce $83 billion of goods in very diverse markets, and you'll see many of those here. And you'll hear about those as we talk about tactics. A trade and logistics hub. We have the #1 U.S. port by foreign waterborne tonnage. And you can see, again, the airports and all that we undertake through air transportation. This is some of the establishments, 4,600 transportation and warehousing establishments, and a growing base of distribution and logistics centers, 131,000 people employed in that area. So I say all of that very, very quickly, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to set the stage for some of the things that we wanted to talk about and provide as many insights as possible. Here are some of the things we have recently assisted with around reshoring, and our team went through the records to see that some of the projects that had been concluded most recently and looked at those and recognizing opportunities from reshoring. They included projects from power and automation technologies, precision high-tech metal parts, aerospace, HVAC, steel pipes and parts for oil and gas energy, petrochemicals, kitchenware, electric motors, and composite or advanced materials and material science. All of those things have been part of what we have seen coming to us over the past probably year, I would say, and then many of those coming in more recently within the last 3 months. What I think, too, at the bottom of that slide, I sort of listed for you where we think from all of our industry targets and our industry ecosystems that we have here around our major sectors, we've targeted a few things that we believe make sense strategically for what we have to offer for our ecosystem and what we can compete to bring to the region. And so medical equipment and essential health and pharmaceutical items are a big part of what we are looking at and seeing, obviously, as we all know from news and from everything that's been reported. Shortages in this area during the pandemic have been difficult for the United States and for all of us. And as far as those global supply chains and supply chains in general, we needed to bring some of that, reshore some of those industries back here. The point made around nearshoring, I thought, was incredibly important as well, as we have seen USMCA launch and the new opportunities we have seen, and we have tremendous connections with Mexico. Obviously, they're our #1 trade partner. And so all of that has made opportunities. They're coming to bear in different ways. And we look at that through the USMCA agreement. We're actually having a major event, USMCA Day, on September 1st with cabinet level officials from Canada, the United States, and Mexico to address some of these topics and opportunities. And so we'll have more information from that. Food supplies are another thing that we have looked at, and then advanced manufacturing across all of our sectors. And having such a deep manufacturing base that's already here, it makes perfect sense for us to look at all types of manufacturing that can connect in through, again, the strength of the base that we have here across multiple sectors, and such an educated workforce in manufacturing that's already on the ground. Now, I want to stop here and say a word. It sounds like we have these, we do have great statistics and data. We're very proud of the ecosystems that we have here, but we too have undergone changes in our workforce. Obviously, as you know, we've seen huge job loss numbers, as everywhere around the country has and around the globe. And as we've looked out through this pandemic and the economic crisis that's happened, we had probably lost a little over, probably about 350,000 jobs somewhere between the beginning, probably January through the end of May. And I say that because there was already beginning to be some energy changes in that workforce, and we were beginning to see it. We probably lost about 20,000 industry jobs in the energy sector, probably from late November through about March. Interestingly, as we all saw a big surge as the reopenings occurred in May, we actually had the largest month-over-month job gains. 74,000 jobs were created in May. Having said that, it was due to, as we can obviously tell, the reopening and some of the hospitality, restaurants, much of that industry made up those gains. We have, though, still continued to see losses in professional services, energy, and so we're still looking at about 270,000 jobs that we are looking to obviously to fill and looking for new opportunities to come in. As I say that, I recognize that as we are out marketing and showcasing this area, we talk about that available workforce being available and potentially on the ground to undertake new activities and initiatives. And so as we look at the crisis that's occurred, we look for ways to further develop and recruit these reshoring opportunities to Greater Houston. I'm going to say quickly just a little drop-down list of tools and tactics that we looked at as we put together our strategy. The regional coordination and asset mapping, I think, for every community is important. For us, we looked again at all of our Houston airport system, the ports, the industry leaders from throughout the region. What industries are they from, the relationships that they have. We have a great base of global companies, so recognizing that and utilizing them is important. And all of our regional allies and partners. We're so fortunate here in Greater Houston to be this large region and to have such great acumen and great economic development partners throughout the area. We are such a large group. We met, I think, at the end of every week. We convened and helped to organize meetings for all of our regional allies throughout the area to talk about the opportunities, to talk about what we were all seeing, and to try to engage in the best possible opportunities that we can find to move our way through this crisis. Proactive business recruitment strategy. We have a very strong list of economic development committees and structures here. Engaging our business leadership in them to help us identify, again, opportunities has been paramount to everything that we've undertaken. The Consular Corps of Houston, we're fortunate to have over 90 consulates. We are meeting them virtually, of course, every other week and every month to engage them in economic development initiatives and to find opportunities to, again, connect. They're incredibly helpful around those areas. State and federal program coordination, of course, the U.S. Commercial Service, Select USA. We've looked at Discover Global Markets around exporting opportunities, connecting our export plan and strategy, synergies with that recruitment initiatives. Ex-Im Bank, Kimberly Reed is speaking for us tomorrow at our Business Beyond Borders. Again, a program that we put forward through the partnership for our member companies and others throughout the region. Tools for success, data analysis, research, the ACE tool, much outreach that we've done. There's all kinds of tools that we believe can be helpful, and we're always happy to share best practices and the ones that we've used. Incentives on the local, state, and federal level, and again, we have lists of those. Marketing around our message development and our delivery of those messages, how and how we proliferate that message, and globally, it's incredibly important, again, to utilize our base and utilize our state and federal programs to help us get that message to the correct recipients. Trends, again, virtual meetings and events. I want to say a special word about that. When the COVID pandemic began and we recognized that we would be working virtually and not able to travel as we had done previously, we decided to see how we could take advantage of that opportunity and even increase our international activities as much as possible, frankly, try to work more virtual events and continue to outreach. You're saving travel time, not that it's the preferred method, you'd rather be on a plane and in person, but if you can't, then perhaps you can do more virtual outreach, saving the time that you travel and putting that into additional outreach and connections internationally. We've done multiple events since February, and I think they've been incredibly successful, and we'll be doing many more. I think, again, consider nearshoring opportunities, looking at the advantages that can bring, and then looking at your professional organizations and looking at materials that have been published. The Economic Development Research Partners out of International Economic Development Council obviously is always a great resource. Look at past publications, look at everything that they're doing, and find tips. I know that one of the first webinars that I heard when Richard Florida went down his list of predictions and changes that he felt could potentially happen. It allows you that and much more from those webinars can give you hints about how you might conduct some of your outreach and find opportunities and look for opportunities within the crisis. So I will stop there and look forward. There's my contact information. please reach out to me. Again, we have a large team. I can hook you up with the individuals working each part of the globe that can provide really strategic information, and we're always happy to be a good partner and share information. So thank you again for the invitation to be here today.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was great information for all of our listeners today, because it's obviously you've taken a very thoughtful approach to putting this together. It's worked for you up to this point very successfully, and we all need to be thinking about this opportunity in this unique time that we're in. So we really appreciate all of your insights. I do want to remind everyone that you can ask questions for any of our speakers. Type them into the question bar box on the GoToWebinar box to the right of your screen at any time, and we will get them sorted through to go through at the end of our presentation. Our final presentation today is from Michelle Comerford. Michelle develops corporate location strategies and executes site selection projects for Biggins Lacey Shapiro and Company, manufacturing and distribution clients. Based in Cleveland, Michelle has worked across a range of industries during her 13-year career. She is an expert in transportation logistics cost analysis and has advised numerous clients on site selection decisions with an emphasis on supply chain network optimization, inbound and outbound transportation costs, and customer service requirements. Michelle was formerly with Austin Consulting, serving most recently as managing director of the group. During her career, she has directed the evaluation of supply chain logistics, location strategy, and community site selection alternatives, as well as due diligence, incentives negotiation, property acquisition, and other aspects of project implementation. Michelle has been a featured speaker at a number of economic development events and meetings, and she is a frequent contributor to industry-specific publications. Michelle is also a member of the Site Selectors Guild, where she serves on the board of directors and as the secretary. Michelle earned her BS in Business Administration, emphasizing logistics and marketing, from John Carroll University. Michelle, we're thrilled to have you here today, and we will turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate that introduction, and happy to be here with everybody. I don't know if it's good or bad to have the third slot. Hopefully everyone's got some coffee still left in their cup and they're sticking with us here. I want to apologize quickly in advance because I am having some technical issues, so I'm going to have the moderator advance my slides for me. So you're going to hear a couple next slide comments, so I hope you don't mind that. But I appreciate the invitation to participate in this today. I have been writing a lot of articles and doing a lot of webinars on this topic related to reshoring and FDI, as those have some very similar drivers to them, as we'll talk about, and some of the supply chain shifts and impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic, and then what economic developers can do to sort of prepare for that. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'll just remind everyone to please type in any questions you have into the chat or the questions box on your menu. And I think we'll have plenty of time to get to those at the end. Next slide, please. So just quickly about Biggins Lacey Shapiro, for those who may not be familiar with our firm. We're a professional site selection and incentives negotiation firm. We work across a variety of industry sectors and facility types across North America and globally through some strategic partners that we have. And we work on behalf of clients for industrial, office, and technical and mission critical types of operations. But as Maureen said in the introduction, I'm the industrial and supply chain practice leader. And so today I'm going to really focus my comments on the manufacturing and distribution side of business and some of those impacts. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of things we could say about the different types of disruptions that COVID-19 has brought on our society and continues to bring on our society. As a mother of 3 kids awaiting the fall school schedule, that's one I could write a whole presentation about. But looking at specifically today, the business supply chain disruptions, which have also been well documented in the headlines, and technically really going back to even January, February of this year for some industry sectors. If you recall back, and there's a couple snippets here that I pulled down over the past few months. And as someone who works in and has supply chain in my title, it's been pretty interesting to see the term supply chain really go mainstream over the past few months. And I think the pandemic has made the general public, as well as politicians and others, just much more aware of the structure of what supply chains for products are made up of, and products that we have come to rely on and assume that we can always easily source, we can always go to the store and get. And the pandemic has certainly turned that viewpoint on its head, both related to the supply side of companies being able to source things internationally, and the demand side as spikes in consumer demand for certain products also disrupted manufacturers' ability to keep the shelves stocked. And we're still seeing that in some cases, which is even more interesting. But one important thing I want to point out is that the trend and the idea of reshoring, or really making products closer to markets where they'll be consumed, had already started to swing. I think in Bruce's presentation, he was citing it back just over the past 2 years maybe, but really you can trace this trend back more like 8 or 9 years in some cases, due to a number of different factors and shifting global dynamics. And again, the statement is really not broad. You know, there's for some companies and some industry sectors, many were already rethinking their production strategies. And that has largely been due to the cost of living and wages going up in Asia. So some of that really, really dirt cheap labor that they originally were chasing is not there. Transportation costs going up over this course of time, over this 8 or 9 years, as we had so much import and so little export. That supply demand of containers and ships was driving that cost up over time. And so some of those cost advantages in general were going down. At the same time, locally in China, as their quality of life has risen, locally they're demanding more of these consumer goods. So companies had to serve that market as well as make enough to ship halfway across the world back to the U.S. And then in addition to that, over the past couple of years, with the trade wars and the tariffs that were implemented specifically and especially on China, that also drove some more companies to think about shifting their production and lowering their risk for these costs and disruption issues. And in addition to that, at the same time, you know, as they rethink kind of these strategies, the benefits of producing products closer to markets where they will be consumed is that you can serve those markets faster, you can react faster to changing consumer preferences, you can bring new products to market faster, you don't have to hold as much inventory. And then some of the natural disaster risks previous to COVID was also driving some of that thought process to consider moving production. So not necessarily vacating China altogether in some cases, as I mentioned, staying there to serve that local market. But as far as the portion of production that was destined for the U.S. market, some of that thought for some companies and some industry sectors was already starting to happen. So the pendulum was starting to swing, the tariffs helped swing it a little bit further, And COVID-19 is really pushing that pendulum even further for a number of companies. And this is just to note, this comment would be for both what we call reshoring, but it could be FDI, foreign companies that were serving the U.S. from offshore that, for these same reasons I just went through, want to now produce product closer to the market. So they're also helping alleviate their risk factors and serving the market faster and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So as companies are weighing their manufacturing footprints globally and domestically, there are some factors. When we work with a company on a site selection project, oftentimes we're starting out early with them on what we call location strategy. We're helping them strategize about these global footprints or even more regional or continent-based, and helping them model a lot of different factors, both direct costs and indirect costs. And with COVID-19 especially, there are some of these costs or factors that were included before, but are now, with this major disruption, included in those models with increased weights and increased importance in how companies are factoring these things in. And so these are factors that go beyond just manufacturing cost, or if you've heard of the term ex works price, that is basically the cost of producing a product, solely the manufacturing cost offshore versus the U.S. And that was really hard to measure, oftentimes with that low cost labor in China. It was very difficult for the U.S. to compete. So if a company was only looking at ex works price, then it was natural to go to China. Now, with some of these other factors coming into play with increased importance, they're looking at factoring in some of these hard costs, more about transportation, the packaging, costs of customs, costs of storing more inventory to protect disruptions. So the warehousing, the inventory carrying costs, the air or water transportation, as well as some risk and strategic factors, such as the disruptions that we just saw with the pandemic, or natural hazard disruptions with international travel and shipping, intellectual property protection risks, the supplier networks, and being able to source the quality supplies that they need, and things like consumer preferences. And one of the other big things coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic that I'm even hearing from friends and family is this preference for a made in the USA label. And so companies are being forced to also consider that, will it make our product more attractive to have that made in the USA label, even if it costs a little bit more? And I've heard many comments from, like I said, friends and families indicating that sort of thing. And so that is all being factored into those decision-making models. The idea of looking at ex works price plus all of these other types of costs, like I have these examples here, helps to define what is called a total cost of ownership, which is a term that was coined by the Reshoring Initiative. If you're familiar with them, Harry Mosier is the president of that group, and we have a strategic partnership with them. I work with Harry on a number of thought leadership pieces, and just working together to advance the reshoring and FDI activity. But this total cost of ownership is also a model that the Reshoring Initiative has available for free on their website. that is something you can, that might help you as you work with different companies that are either already in your community or that you're coming across that are questioning, can we make this in the US? That tool is free and helps them consider these additional cost factors and not just that X works price. So I encourage you, if you're not familiar with the Reshoring Initiative, to check out their website and see some of the tools there. Next slide, please. Can you hit the next slide, Erica? Oops. There we go. Thank you. So how much impact does, consideration of those additional factors I talked about, the total cost of ownership over just the X works price have when it comes to considering which strategy makes more sense for a company? Well, again, with the Reshoring Initiative, with that TCO model, Harry is able to track some of the results of those business cases that get logged into that model on a confidential basis, but to look at the data together, it can help really paint a picture and put some numbers to the importance of this. So on this model, the colored lines are showing the number of business cases that, from the TCO model over the past couple of years, as those have been loaded in with their specific costs of business for their product. And if you look at price alone, the U.S. rarely is favored over a China low-cost offshore option. And that's the blue line there. This vertical black line in the middle here is the parity of U.S. versus China manufacturing costs. When you factor in the TCO, you see this red line, approximately 32% of business cases, when you consider TCO2, will result in a more favorable U.S. location over China. And when you factor in TCO plus the 15% tariff that was imposed in the U.S.-China trade wars more recently, that results in about 46% of business cases come out more favorable for U.S. over China. So this is just an example to kind of put some numbers to why and how that TCO, that extra, those other costs outside of just manufacturing are important to factor in. And so perhaps in some cases, again, as you talk to local companies or their suppliers, if they're looking to you to help them bring their suppliers closer to them and make that case, there might be some good tools here, some good talking points for you to use with them. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, all of this disruption and all the different fallout from that is already started to and will continue to drive some rethinking of manufacturing strategies. I want to stress that this will not be the case for all companies and all industry sectors, but we will definitely see some makeshifts, and we already are seeing some makeshifts based on these kind of trends. So first is kind of what I've been talking about, that local for local. So more regionalized manufacturing, instead of making products in China to serve the U.S., bringing that closer. And whether that is in the U.S. or Mexico, as we've already kind of talked about on here, that's certainly part of that strategy, just getting closer to the markets where they'll be served. The China plus one strategy. So for some that need to stay in China for various reasons or need to stay in Asia, there is also a trend of diversifying away from China, or not being so reliant on China, and that the buzzword for that has been called China plus one. So paring back some of their manufacturing and investing in other low-cost Asian countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, others that can still be in Southeast Asia, but out from under the Chinese government and protect better against some of those other risk factors, especially with IP protections and that sort of thing. Smaller plants. So with this trend, and when I say smaller plants, you see I have that in quotes for a reason. I'm not saying we're going to have a bunch of 50,000 square foot plants everywhere per se, but what I'm saying is rather than one huge mega 2 million square foot plant in China to serve the whole world, it'll pull out, 500,000 square feet of that and bring to North America to serve that market. That's just an example. But instead of these one mega plant to serve the whole globe, scaling those back and putting multiple plants that are in fact smaller, but not tiny. And the capacities will be based on the market size to be served. And with that too, then they can better customize the products for those markets. So perhaps there's a certain type of product in that Europe likes blue of and the US likes orange of, or something like that. So they can really customize better that way too. There's a lot of benefits to being closer to the markets to be served. Fourthly, the strategic commodities closer to home. So we talked about a little about some of the industry sectors that are primed for reshoring. And in Bruce's list, not to pick on you, Bruce, but I was very curious or surprised, and this might be just a result of what companies they surveyed, but in that Thomas survey, that life sciences, pharmaceutical, medical supply wasn't included on that. And like I said, that might have been just a result of who participated in the survey, which is always a tricky part about surveys, right? But that strategic commodities, so again, with the pandemic, the medical supplies, medical equipment, PPE, pharmaceutical, all of that we realized very quickly, the U.S. did not have the capabilities to make that stuff on our own, and we had to really scramble to fill those gaps. And there's a lot of great, really neat stories that came out and continue to come out of existing domestic manufacturers and retooling their lines to make those critical supplies and essential goods. But I think that opened the eyes really of, again, a lot of the government and others that those are some areas where we definitely need to reshore so we don't find ourselves in that position again. And so a lot of strategic thinking and looking is already starting to happen. And we're seeing even the federal government looking to invest in and provide some funding for pharmaceuticals, for example, some of those, again, strategic, important drugs that we need to be able to produce and control ourselves. And so we're seeing that already start to happen and expect more of that. Increased automation and artificial intelligence. So one major reason that the reshoring trend could even be thought as a possibility over the past 8 or 9 years is the increases in automation. So our less reliance on hundreds and hundreds of people manually putting things together and increasing, really automating that, so we don't have to rely on finding that cheap labor. So the automation, and that also helps our companies be more productive, be more efficient. And as I think everyone knows, we're not talking about no workers. We still need workers, but they need to be higher skilled. And so that will continue, and we're seeing that now. That's really helping advance and will help us advance the reshoring and FDI investments going forward in the U.S. And then lastly, as we think about short-term and long-term strategies, I think also Bruce had it in his presentation that reshoring won't happen overnight. And I 1,000% agree with that, especially when you talk about manufacturing operations. It takes minimum, 18 months to build and get equipment in and commission it and get up and running. And so as we look about short-term strategies, ways to control the risks in that time period, should we, heaven forbid, have to shut down again or have some other kind of disruption, we're seeing and expecting more companies to increase their inventory. And so that's going to mean a run on distribution and warehouse space in the near term in the U.S. So they can ramp up, keep their supplies and products stored as they continue to rethink their strategies and or start to build a new plant. So it's going to take a couple of years for us to see major investment and companies up and running, but certainly it is in the works. Next slide, please. So I've given you a couple tidbits, but just some other thoughts. People say, what do we need to do? How can we position ourselves to attract this reshoring investment or FDI, this new activity that is happening and projected to happen? And what you'll see on this list is probably a lot of things that you go, well, that's the same thing you've been telling us for years that we need to do. And that's one of the big takeaways here, is that a big part of being attractive for new investment are the same important factors that the site selection community has been preaching about for many years. I talked about the increased automation in manufacturing plants. And we still, that skills gap that we've been harping on the past few years, that's still here. It's still such an important piece of the puzzle. And so I can't emphasize enough workforce training. Many communities and states have been really proactive in this, which has been great to see, but we've got to keep ramping it up, keep getting into those young people early, get them excited about manufacturing, and help get them into these pipelines. It's really important. Ready to go sites and buildings. We already were having this problem before with timelines being short, not being able to find inventory. I'm here to tell you the inventory of existing buildings for manufacturing right now is still extremely low and getting lower. So if you have the other components and you have a good business case for manufacturing, and maybe in particular what even industry sector or industry sectors you're a good fit for, I really encourage you to think about investing in shell building and tailoring that to what that industry needs. Don't just throw up 4 walls and pray for the best. I mean, really be strategic about it, but places that have shell buildings that also have good infrastructure and a workforce and et cetera, are getting on the radar first. And because oftentimes that's what we're doing. We're going out and saying, we're looking for existing buildings. And then if we can't find those, we're looking for ready to go sites. So that's the next best thing, shovel ready sites. And by shovel ready, truly ready to go. Utilities there are pretty much there with a plan that's not 3 years long to get the utilities there. You really need to decrease that project timeline. So that would include then having utility and logistics infrastructure. Again, more automation means more power. So you've got to have, if you're targeting a manufacturing operation, you've got to have more power service there than you would for a traditional distribution center. Because otherwise, we're talking about having to upgrade lines and capacities in a major way. That can be years of time. So then we're moving on. So all those 3 things are certainly what we've been saying over time and continue to be important. Number 4, this is going to be a tricky one, I think, in the coming years with the budget shortfalls we've had, but I continue to keep it on there to the extent that it's possible, having flexible incentive support programs. So ability to help close those gaps as needed. And sometimes it doesn't have to be cash per se. It can be expedited permitting. I had a situation a few years ago with a project that the community didn't know at the time, but when we came in for due diligence, the site needed millions of dollars worth of dirt to prep the site for development. And the city didn't have the money per se, but they did have some other land. And so they donated dirt. So literally this incentive was dirt, but it was worth millions of dollars to the company, and it really helped. It was a really great example of being flexible to support the needs. And the second bullet under there is about potential federal support. I mentioned the pharmaceutical emphasis, and the federal government has stepped in. There's been some investment in Virginia, I think, for a pharmaceutical operation to start making essential pharmaceuticals. So again, trying to expedite those essential products. So pay attention to that. There is, we're keeping our eye out and ear out and trying to stay ahead of the learning curve, because that's a new thing, having this federal support for some of this reshoring. And it's not going to be across the board at this point, but at least for some of these essential products. So you want to stay on top of that so you can talk, you can be educated when you're talking with prospects about that kind of stuff. And then lastly, supply chain gap fulfillment. So part of the challenge with reshoring to this point has been that for some industry sectors, the whole sector vacated. And when it did, all the suppliers either offshored to, or they fizzled out and they retooled to do something else. And so for some of these industries coming back or wanting to come back, they're having to identify a whole new supply chain network. And so there's a gap there between needing supplies, as well as, though, we have a lot of companies that have all this really cool automated equipment, 3D printing capabilities, et cetera, that need to, they're available to help fill those gaps, so they don't know about the gaps. So there's this double-sided gap here that I do think that economic developers can play a role in, and especially in your local communities, of looking at who do we have here? What are their capabilities? Are they able to grow? Do they want to grow? What did they retool to make during the pandemic? Okay, if they can make that, what else could they make that, this company across town needs help, so they don't have to import that anymore. So really looking at that even throughout your state, throughout your regional area, I think is a really unique and new opportunity for economic developers to help promote new investment and job growth. There are a couple things, again, available from the Reshoring Initiative. I promise you I'm not getting paid by the Reshoring Initiative for these commercials, but they really are a good resource and have some free tools. They do have these programs that are not free, but they have the capabilities and the know-how. One is called the Import Substitution Program. So for companies you have locally, like I just gave that example, they've been importing and their product, and either they don't want to import anymore, they don't know where to go, or you want to help, just make that case with some of your other local suppliers that have the capability in your state or in your region. They have a program, technique to help you with that. They also have a supply chain gap program, just helping identify where are the gaps, and then you can come up with a strategy for pursuing companies with the capabilities locally for helping fill that. So there's hopefully some good takeaway tools and ideas here. Last slide. And I just want to say thanks again for inviting me to participate. Hopefully you all are walking away with at least one new tidbit of information that will be helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We really appreciate your insight. And I think everyone has written down reshoring initiatives as sort of our next place to look for information. So we appreciate that. We have some good questions, and we still have a few more minutes if you want to add them to the list. But I'm going to start off with really a broad question that I would like Bruce, Susan, and Michelle to all think about. And we'll go in order of the screen here. But 4.5 months ago, we truly, I don't think ever would have expected we would be where we are today. Is there like a quick thought soundbite on what you think we have learned in the past 4 months about where we're at, what the state of our opportunity is for reshoring, maybe a tidbit about how we can, best handle the situation. So what's like your 4 months takeaway on something we've learned that will help us going forward? So we'll start with Bruce.
Thanks. Good morning. Great question. I think the key takeaway of the last 4.5 months, if I can speak for myself, is you really truly know who your friends are. I guess the U.S. truly got to know who their true allies were and who stood by them in terms of materials and supplies. It also really shed a lot of light on workforce, the ability to have a lot of your folks work from home no matter where they are in the globe and be able to communicate with them. I know that's not really a reshoring thing, but you really get to know who you could trust via supplier standpoint.
Very good. Susan, same question.
Yeah, I'll build on that a little bit, but I think really for us here in Greater Houston, there were a couple of things that we learned. One was just as I think any crisis brings, the strength of the community and the collaborations within, right? We had medical professionals from the Texas Medical Center working with the city and the county. The partnership was side by side. We all had parts in this, and so I think it was a great testament to just the strengthening of the regional kind of collaborations. From the economic development side, we were bringing our partners together, and I think everyone was sharing really best practices. And looking at reshoring, I think there being that preparedness too. I think that's a great way to describe it, is looking at that and understanding what that means and how we can all contribute to that, I think, and move forward in a positive direction.
Thanks. Michelle?
Those are both great answers. I think I would say, one thing, if for those that follow me or connected with me on LinkedIn, you'll see I've been posting throughout this are a lot of silver linings. I think with every sort of tragedy or major disruption like this, there are always some positives that come out of it, and that's what I've been choosing to look for. And I've been, as I mentioned, really impressed with how quickly and how well our existing, and I say the U.S., but I know there are examples in Canada and other states and other countries as well, but how well our existing manufacturers stepped up and not forced to be per se, but most of them stepped up and voluntarily retooled. So we have a lot of capabilities to make things and be innovative, and that is not going to go away. So we have a lot to build on there. And then the other point I would say, and I think this is a little bit what Susan was saying, but just the idea of being prepared for risk and what that means now. I think that there are different, we have clients, or is it in a hurricane area, or what is the frequency of tornadoes and that sort of risk that we thought about traditionally. And now this idea of a major global disruption and what that can do. And so I think just opening up our eyes as we think about and weigh location decisions and strategies, that is a major takeaway that will continue, I think, into the near future.
Thanks, Michelle. There are several questions around a similar topic of virtual trade missions, virtual site visits. So I'm going to start with Susan and ask, can you share an example of a virtual event that you've put on to increase your international visibility in the past few months?
Oh, definitely. We've had several. I think I'll cite something that we did around Select USA, who was our partner in this. But when our strategy was completed, we were actually under strategy development when, luckily, we began previously before March. But really, the culmination of all of the work that we had done for approximately 7 months came to fruition at the end of March. And one of our first home meetings of our business leadership around economic development was the ratification of the strategy. And so with it came the addition to add aerospace and aviation to the actual target sectors and work it from the commercial standpoint moving forward. And so one of the first things we did after that was to convene using Select USA and our partnership with our commercial service team here in the Greater Houston, a global, really, orientation to Greater Houston around the ecosystem for that industry sector. And we had multiple people that presented during that from industry, from universities, from the partnership, and our newest team of industry experts. We have a global aerospace and aviation director, was able to kind of come in as well and lead that. And we were able to touch 60 to probably 60 companies all over the globe simultaneously. And so that was a great opportunity for us without traveling internationally to have all of those people online and send out that message. Now, in the same vein, we've done very specific sort of outreaches to particular companies or individuals that would never have had the time, frankly, to travel in. And so we can at times put 3 or 4 together in different ways. And actually, we're looking at the fall in having our elected officials participate in some global events where we mimic an international trade mission, but we just do it around a virtual schedule that's sort of connected to the time zones. And we'll do some back-to-back Zoom meetings, much like we would travel from meeting to meeting. We will do that on Zoom. And so I think those are new ways of doing things. Again, we'd love to be face-to-face, but I think as the world becomes more accustomed to this, perhaps that generates additional opportunities for us to really enhance our international relationships and then just push forward. Once we can travel again, I don't think we'll ever abandon face-to-face meetings. Our goal is to get that back. But perhaps now we'll look at a new mix of those and see the results.
Thanks, Susan. And I think all of us who do this for a living agree that we miss it. As much as we know it's not glamorous, going out and meeting with our customer is just critical to our success. So I think it's good to take a little break from being a road warrior, but we probably, those of us who've done this for a long time, do miss it. Michelle, I want to twist that question a little to doing virtual site visits, site tours, and maybe Bruce can chime in here too, but have you seen any great examples so far, and how is that challenge different? Obviously, time zone is the main one when we're looking at international companies, but are there any technology challenges that you've seen, once again, realizing it's only been a few months, but you're very busy? Any good examples or things to look out for as we look at probably increasingly doing more international site tours online?
Sure. Yeah, we have done a couple virtual site visits. You know, we try to kind of advance the ball as far as we can. You know, at a certain point, you've got to go out there and see the site. But it has been beneficial because our clients, particularly if they're international, they can often have more people participate than would have if it was an in-person visit. And so there's an upside there. I mean, I think in general, some of the basic things are important, but just thinking about the limitations with bandwidth in some cases, oftentimes communities want to show a video, for example, and oftentimes the internet bandwidth isn't quite cooperating when you're looking at across, you know, the borders, especially, that can vary. And so something like that, you want to think about what can you peel off and perhaps send them ahead. Watch this ahead of our meeting, because what you don't want is kind of have this like blippy, video, and then it kind of just sets a weird tone for the meeting. So I recommend if you have a video, you want to send that ahead as sort of like an introduction, and then, use the meeting time to talk more live. Slides are easier to view and pictures, but think about some of those things that take up a lot of bandwidth. The Site Selectors Guild did a couple of webinars, free webinars over the past month or two, and the second one we did, Dee Caldwell with Global Location Strategies had a segment within that one specifically about virtual tours. So I recommend, if you haven't watched that, watch the whole webinar, but her piece is specifically on virtual site visits is really helpful.
Great, thank you. Bruce, another question here that I think you could help us out with. Which countries have the advantage when it comes to reshoring, and which states, perhaps? I guess it's a states country, so two-part. And does Canada have a part to play in reshoring manufacturing?
Great question. I'm actually going to take a step back, and if you don't mind, I'm going to answer the last question. Obviously, we did an IEDC webinar recently on virtual meetings. So if anyone wants to download that, that's available on the IEDC website. I think virtual meetings creates a huge opportunity, as before typically lead generation was focused primarily around cities or trade shows or geographies. Now, when we do this work for our clients, we're no longer bound by such limitations of a trade show directory or industry directory. We really have the ability to scan the world through our clients' target sector. So by pivoting our business model to virtual meetings, it's allowed us to really target the best company no matter where they are in the world. So it's actually, while we panicked in March, like how are we going to get our clients face-to-face with companies, it actually created a business model that I think will be sustainable moving forward. Now, Maureen, to answer your new question, I think Canada does have a role in reshoring. I think you look at some recent visa limitations put forth by the U.S. federal government about concerning qualified workers and H-1B visas. I think that's created a huge opportunity for Canada to recruit technology talent. So you look at cities like Waterloo, Montreal, and Toronto. They're salivating at the idea of getting some talented workforce from abroad that typically in the past have gone to the U.S., but might look to Canada. You might look at California will be the first place that some people look at, but then they might get turned off by some of the regulatory environments. So states like Arizona, Nevada might get a look as well, and Texas.
Thanks. Michelle, this is probably just a quick question, but are foreign trade zones a requirement that you are seeing for your projects, or seeing with a greater increase for your projects?
So at this point, not necessarily. I mean, it's always been for anyone that is, planning to import supplies and parts or export what they're making. That's always been a requirement. It hasn't been necessarily an increase factor or requirement that we've seen with our most recent projects. It's always a nice to have, and it seems like oftentimes if a project does need it and we're looking in a particular area and that site is not within the zone, oftentimes it's been relatively easy to extend an existing zone to include that. And so I think that's probably one reason it hasn't raised in importance. But I don't know if that answers it for that person.
Yep, no, that works. I think it's something we've all sort of used a bit in the past, or it's come up in the top 10 questions, but just didn't know if there was an increase now on that. One question that's once again general, so for any or all to ask. We've seen the trends. I think everyone mentioned it. Bruce started with it with some data to support it through to Michelle. that reshoring has been happening. It's just maybe now increased from over the past year and a half or 2 years. After the pandemic, which I think we all look forward to, in whatever form that looks, is reshoring still going to be a thing? Is this a very long-term trend? Do you all believe? And we can start with Bruce. I'm just looking at the order of the pictures. So Bruce, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think reshoring is here to stay. You know, we speak with C-level executives each and every day, and at first there was a lot of anger that you know they could put themselves in this position to begin with. I think this trend will happen gradually. I think it's going to be a 3 to 5 year gradual. You're going to see those numbers that I posted earlier go down in terms of the amount imported versus amount produced in the United States. I think it's here to stay. It's going to happen gradually over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, we're getting close to time, and there's more questions. So if you have something to add, great. If not, I can just rapid fire on some of these questions.
I just want to add something really quick. So
Sure.
just to not confuse it, I mean, I think we've kind of gradually used the term reshoring to account for anything that's manufacturing investment into the U.S. So reshoring would suggest that they left and now they're coming back. But in some cases, we're also talking about they were never here, right? So a startup that designed a product and went right to China to have it made. So I just want to emphasize that some of that will also be coming. And yes, I agree, here to stay for sure. This is the tip of the iceberg of this new trend of it, you know, coming back or coming to the U.S. for the first time. And that's how you could quantify some of the FDI for products that are destined for the U.S. market. That's kind of the emphasis there. So it's not that everyone's going to leave China and no one's going to make anything there, but for products for the U.S., we'll see a big increase in that manufacturing capability, and in North America in general, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I would just quickly agree with that. And having talked with some of our largest companies, you know, the common, or you'll hear, you know, we're looking at we're reevaluating the entire chain, and these are massive global looks. And so I think it is opportunities that would have perhaps been looked at in other places and now are looking here. So it's what could potentially come back, but as Michelle said so well, it's opportunities that hadn't even yet materialized. So they're rethinking everything.
Excellent, thank you. We are getting toward the close, so I just want to say a couple of things. On your screen right now, you see the link for restoreyoureconomy.org. This is something provided by the IEDC that really gives some spot-on information that all of us need as we look at how to move forward in an area that we haven't spent much time before, how to do economic development during a pandemic, a global pandemic. So certainly check out that. I want to thank Emily, Erica, Jeff, and the whole IEDC staff for putting this together, the logistics, and keeping it all as smooth as possible. So thank you to them. Thanks to our speakers, a really terrific job, Bruce, Susan, and Michelle. We appreciate your expertise and your insights. To all of our participants, within about 48 hours, as was mentioned, you'll be able to access all of these presentations on the IEDC website. We had over 100 attendees today, and we really appreciate all of you spending time with us. In August, there will be some additional webinars sponsored by IEDC on topical in areas of great sense. It seems that it keeps evolving and changing, but we'll keep right on top of what are the important issues that we need to be discussing and learning. With that, thank you again for everyone for participating, and be well.